Sihiye Mishakeila. Learning the Maamar about this verse of Sihiye Mishakeila v'akar b'atzecha es misbar yamecha amale. The verse is from Parshas Mishpatim, where it says there will be no bereaved or barren woman in your land. I'll fill the number of your days. If we're studying Torah, we see this verse. Hey, we like this. Also, though, we have a question. It says Sihiye, there will not be. The same word can be there will not be or there shall not be. Which way is it going? We'll look at this whole verse in context. Maybe that will tell us what verse comes before it. Va'avadatem es havaya elokechem. Serve God, your Elokim. V'erachas lachmecha v'esmemecha. V'asirasi machla bekerbecha. He will bless your bread and your water, and I will remove illness from your midst. So is that saying, to get this blessing, if it is a blessing, not a command, that there will be no bereaved or barren woman in your land, I'll fill the number of your days, is it contingent upon divine service? So we do what we're supposed to do in divine service, and then this all comes to pass. Okay, that could make sense if you only look at the simple explanation of things, but we know from other parts of the Torah, for example, we know from Gemara, etc., that that's not the case, actually. There's a lot that's predetermined. Not just that there's a lot that's predetermined, but specifically even these blessings that are mentioned here, of life and health, children and sustenance, all that is predetermined. What are we playing at here to say, serve God and you will have these blessings? Oh, by the way, they've already been predetermined. Now, as a side note, it doesn't delve into it here in the Maamar, but as a side note, when we say that a Jew has no mazel, we mean that just because something's been predetermined doesn't mean that we're bound by it. These are all the things that probably will happen in your life, but these are also things that through prayer and Torah mitzvahs, etc., that we can also change it. So God is open to us changing it. Doesn't mean it will be changed, but it could be changed. So we are not bound by whatever's been predetermined in this regard. If that's the case, just focusing on that aspect of it, say that it's all been predetermined, so what are we playing at here? Do service, you'll get these blessings, but actually we just said that you don't. So one explanation would say, no, the abundance of the blessing. You might be slated for these blessings, whether or not they're going to come to you, how, etc., that's going to depend on your service. And now once we're out that and we're talking about service, again, this whole thing is service doesn't even make sense. If you say love God, okay, fear God, okay, service means that God needs something from us. No, he doesn't. And if he does, he's not God. By the way, just as a side thing, when we talk about love of God, there's something that I just saw recently. I think it's from the Friedrich Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, that every mitzvah has a physical manifestation. There's a physical way to do the mitzvah. That's the whole point of the world, to do mitzvahs, Torah mitzvahs in the world. So when you look at something like love of God, what does that physically look like in the world? Love of God in your heart. Remember, even when we talk about prayer, you're supposed to verbalize prayer. Movement of the lips is considered an action. Even that, we don't want prayer to just be in the mind. We want it to be verbalized. So you say love of God, what's that supposed to look like? So you can do actions, and you can say, oh, my actions show my love of God, but your actions, whatever the mitzvah is. How does love of God, how does it become physical in the world? So again, I think it's the previous Rebbe says it. The Friedrich Rebbe says that when we're talking about love of God, it's supposed to be to the extent that the same way that your heartbeat changes when you see somebody that you love, somebody who's very dear to you, your heartbeat literally changes. So love of God, literally to the extent that your heartbeat changes. That's a physical reaction. That's how deep your love of God. You can see how there's always a new level to reach. A level of love of God to the extent that you literally feel it, your heartbeat changing from it. Back to this. But now we're talking about service of God. So what is service of God and what are we talking about? That God needs it? What? So the first thing that we're looking at, kind of the unofficial first section of the Maamar, is does our service make a difference? Again, also, we said it's predetermined. So what? God doesn't need our service. What are we doing here? You can see how if you look at something without asking the question, without thinking about it, wait a second, Torah doesn't just make words up. Everything is very specific. What's going on here? So we have sources, we have texts that say actually God doesn't care. When we talk about doing the mitzvahs, the details, God cares if you chef like this. No, God, it's all for you. Torah mitzvahs are for you. Refining man in creation. He doesn't need it, you need it. Then we see from other texts, like actually, no, it does make a difference. That Moshe goes up and he sees Hashem tying the crowns to the letters and God says, you're going to wish me luck? So it seems, okay, we do make a difference. But how can these both be true? And they are both true because they're both from Torah. That's when we started saying, well, it depends on which level you're talking about. There are dimensions, what are that supposed to mean? There are dimensions of God that interact with creation, that have a more immediate relationship with creation. Like the name of Elokim, like the name of Avaya that's associated with creation but also above creation. At this level, does God care? Yes, at this level that has an immediate relationship to creation, yes, God cares. So you do Torah mitzvahs like we saw. Go up to the highest world, these vessels which are like the first time we're starting to use language of something not being just God. We have all the different attributes, etc. And then us, we are at the end of that spectrum because we walk around thinking that we exist on our own. That's the farthest of just having something now that you call not God. So all the way up to that level, whatever we do, there's a ripple effect all the way up there. As in, are the vessels going to be intact? Do we do something to disrupt the vessel so the light can't fully flow through? Now we can see how that's immediate relationship to creation. We can see how creations will have an impact there. Does God care on that level? Yeah, he kind of cares. Now, there's levels, or whatever it means, dimensions of God that are higher than that they're so high up, they have no relationship to creation per se. So those levels, like this, they don't care. That's how we reconcile these two different opinions. That would be fine, except, remember, we're looking closely. We're looking at the words of the verse. We know that when the Torah, if your word is specific, we see that we have the pronoun change. That we went from, serve God, he will bless your bread and your water, and then it goes to I will remove illness. Where did I come from? Why do you switch from he to I? Not just that, I is a level, the same way you, I, and you, these are levels that are beyond a name. The same way that when we have the first word of the Ten Commandments of Anochi, Havaya Elokecha, that I am Havaya, your Elokim. Anochi, remember we learned, is Ani plus the Chaf of Kesser, that much higher level. The reason why it's I is because it's a level that's above a name. So we're looking at something that's a much higher dimension than Havaya or Elokim. That's where we have the idea that someone, capital S, is narrating the Torah with a capital N narrating the Torah. And we see that because the Torah doesn't say Hashem spoke to me, as in Moshe telling this to us, and it doesn't say and I spoke to Moshe. A third party that's much higher than both of these levels of Havaya and Elokim, the names of God that are used, and Moshe, is narrating the Torah to us. That's I, and that's the level that we call essence. And essence is just a core wholesomeness. The same way that your name is an external part of you. Go off to an island somewhere, you don't need a name. So the fish can talk to you, they don't need a name. You don't need a name when you're not around other people. So it's not the core of you. There's a core of you that's inexplicable. Wholesome you. When we say I, we're talking about this level we call Atzmos, the level of essence. Essence just inserted himself into the verse. So at first we said, no, essence is not affected by the things we did. No, wait a second. Essence is now in the verse, which seems to indicate, especially because essence is going to bring to us, is going to effectuate much higher levels of blessings. Not just go within the natural order things. People will be healthy and then sometimes they get sick and whatever, but I will remove illness, as in I will do something, which is a much higher level. Essence, which you said is not affected, all of a sudden is. To say, not only does your divine service make a difference at a levels that are immediate to the relationship of creation, but even up to the core essence of God, that's how far reaching your mitzvah is. Because the things that we do, it's not just external stuff. We're not just doing stuff. We're not just here, as we've said. And it's not just that we affect or have a relationship with God at the dimensions that are more closely associated with creation. Up to the core essence level of God, whatever that means, so inexplicable, the ripple effect of the mitzvah goes all the way up there to that level. So not only does it make a difference, not only does he care, but he cares all the way up to the core essence of himself, which is just mind-blowing to say that you puny human, you finite human, you do this one action, the deepest level of God feel it. They care about it. Because ultimately, essence does care about the totality of everything, which is refining man and creation, as we said. Essence doesn't necessarily care about the details of how we get there. Obviously, we have to follow the details to get there, which are Torah mitzvahs of how to get there. Essence wants to see the result of everything, which is refinement of man and creation, making a home for God in this world, where essence can actually show himself, be himself in this world. So it's kind of like the idea is if you're building a house, let's say you're building a house from the ground up, I want to have the house beautiful, ready for me to move into. Some things I'll be more specific about, some things less specific about, but even things that I'm not more specific about, they're fundamentally important. So just because I didn't tell you which nails or which pieces of wood to use in the foundation doesn't mean I don't care about the foundation looks like. Somebody else has got to make sure that you get all those details right. But fundamentally, I do care that those are correct. Just because I'm not micromanaging that doesn't mean that I don't care that it's correct. I do care it's correct because that's going to affect the entire house. So sort of, whatever the muscle's worth, whatever the parable's worth, essence, osmos doesn't necessarily pick out every single nail that you need in the foundation. That's more for the levels of a vial, Kim, etc. Those levels will tell us what those need to be. It cares that everything's going to be correct because if not, the house is not correct. So, does our divine service make a difference? Yes, and not just that, but up to the highest levels, dimensions, core essence of God makes a difference. Now that we're so inspired by that, what does divine service look like? We're not saying love God, which now we know we have to literally feel it in our hearts. We're not saying fear God, they literally also, you have to feel it in your bones and your blood. You have an actual fear of God. I am so tiny before the muchness. Who am I to stand before you? What is it? What does divine service look like? Especially if we're going to do this correctly. So divine service is actually both. It begins with fear. Fear of God is going to get us on the right path. Remember, it's the servant puts himself aside. All your self-concerns, all your opinions, all your wonderful ideas, put it aside. God needs you to do this right now. That's the level of servant. That's fear-based. Whoever you are is, quote unquote, is irrelevant. We need you to get a job done. Now, that's a starting point. The same way that some people, they kind of behave because they're afraid of God's going to punish me. Fine. That's good if you're on the right path, but now you got to move on from there. That's a very basic level. There's way deeper levels to this relationship. So it begins with fear, and then from there, we're going to grow to love of God. And both of those together, that's how we're going to have complete divine service. So we see that, even for example, in davening. Davening begins with hodu. We acknowledge that you're correct. We can't understand it, but we know that you're true. We know that the way you see things is real. That's fear-based, that's submission-based, beyond our understanding. From there, eventually, we get to Shema, focus about love of God. V'aftas Hashem Elokecha, love God. Actually, from there, ultimately, we get to the Amidah, the Shemon Esrei, which is bracha, hamshacha, drawing down the blessings. Fear to love to drawing down the blessings. We don't want everything staying up there. That was actually a little bit of a sidebar about that progression through davening. But what is the main thing about davening? Davening is called service of the heart. Comes from the heart, acts upon the heart. Why is that? Because on the one hand, when we daven correctly, daven out of love. On the one hand, we have our divine soul, the godly soul, your godly-oriented self, the thing that's just obsessed with God all day long, God. Your godly soul is going to be in full alignment. It's going to connect to its source, and it's going to be in full alignment with all of its power, because your entire soul is not in your body. There are levels of the soul that are too holy to get into your physical form. Through that, it's going to be able to now act upon your animal soul. Why do we call it an animal soul? Because it's instinct, self-preservation driven. It's more self-concerned about what makes me happy now, what makes me sad. That's the only thing I don't see much farther than that. What am I I in the mood of? It's going to say, let's take all of your passions and your desires and your abilities and your capacities and let's move them over to godliness. Let's take everything you're capable of, all the stuff that you can do, and let's do it in the right kind of way. When we dive in correctly, in the best way possible, that's the result of it. So now we saw that divine service matters. What does divine service look like? Fear that leads to love of God, both of those together. Now we have full divine service, which is part of why the word that we use for divine service, which is avodah, service, it comes from the word of ibud aretz, it's tanning hides. It's not something that happens overnight. It's a very rigorous process. Fear of God and behaving is not enough. We also have to have refinement of man and creation, which means we also have to change ourselves. And change is a very tough process, and it's a hard process. And this is something that could take a long time. Tanning the hides is a lengthy, rigorous process. We're taking something coarse and we're going to refine it into something that can be elevated, our own physical selves. That's why we're using this kind of language of it, because it's a tough journey. But this is what true divine service looks like. Now that we said that, we're going to go back to the verses and we're going to say, okay, Lo Sihiye Mishakeila Akara. There shall not be a Mishakeila or an Akara. Mishakeila, we said, is a bereaved woman, so someone who, God forbid, buries children, either from miscarriage or buries a child, God forbid. And Akara is somebody who's barren, they can't conceive. Don't be this. There shall not be this. As a blessing, beautiful. We love it. Amen. So it should be. God should make it true. Now, if it's a command, though, what are we supposed to do about that? Because nobody chooses this. So now we're going to look at it in spiritual terminologies. What are we actually talking about here? Because in spiritual terms, this is under our control. This is something that we could actually do something about. So we have to see, what are we talking about in spiritual terms? Who are these people? So an akara, somebody who doesn't have children, someone who's barren, we say it's somebody who cannot conceive. What does that look like in spiritual terms of an akara? In spiritual terms, who is the parent? That is the intellect, and the children are the emotion, to say the emotive aspects. So the intellect is supposed to give birth to an emotive reaction. Love and fear of God and all the other attributes that come from that. An akara, who cannot conceive, cannot go through this process. They have no intellectual excitement that leads to then an emotive outcome. None of that is working for them. Mishakeila is somebody who does go through the process, intellect, they learn about God, they meditate about God, they study, etc., and now have overwhelming love and fear of God. So they feel it, they feel love and fear in the heart, and then it doesn't last. So that's why it's considered Mishakeila, because the children, they don't endure. So more about these and what do we do about it? So we said an akara, there's two kinds of an akara. So somebody whose conception process is not working. Either it's somebody who physically doesn't have a womb. So we saw, for example, the matriarchs. Sarah and Rivka, Sarah and Rebecca, they were barren. They literally didn't have a womb. God had to make the physical organ for them. What does that look like in spiritual terms? In spiritual terms, that somebody, they can't go through the conception process. They can't be a receiver. They can't take in. Why is that? Because they're so full of their own self-concerns, which not necessarily negative stuff, but when you got too much of your own stuff going on, you can't take anything else in. My brain cannot handle this right now. I cannot take this in right now, which many people have said at least probably once, maybe even twice in their lives. I cannot deal with this right now. My brain is too full. In this regard, someone who's, my brain is too full, and it can be good stuff that you're worried about. You have a massive project coming up. You just got daily stuff going on. But because of that, you're blocked and nothing can come in. There's different processes of how to get through that. Either we kind of have to humble ourselves, break ourselves down a little bit. We have to realize that we've been too much indulging in physical stuff, and that's why we've created a blockage. We have to learn how to retreat from that. Remember, this is something I spoke about a lot in Tanya. Why does Tanya care if you eat 3 pieces of cake? It doesn't say anywhere, thou shalt not eat 3 pieces of cake. The Torah doesn't say that in those exact languages. So why does Tanya care? Because the more you give into your physical cravings and desires, the more you're going to be sunken in the physical. That's even before we talk about things that are forbidden. Things that are permitted. Cake's allowed. Kosher cake is allowed. You keep telling the child, yes, yes, yes. Try now to say no. Good luck with that. You've done that to your own self. And then now you've become enslaved almost to your own cravings and your desires, and try to extricate yourself from that. It's very difficult. So that's why Tanya cares. To say that this spiritual kind of akara is in our control, because these are things that we actually could act upon. Trying to extricate ourselves from the indulgence in materiality and physicality because we filled our minds up now with all these concerns. I'm worried about whatever. Yeah, you might have a massive project coming up, but you worrying about it at 11 o'clock at night, it's not going to do anything for the project. All it's going to do is just give you more wrinkles. It's going to gray your hair a little bit, but you can't do anything about the project now. So where's your worry taking you? Nowhere. It's funny to think about it, but your worry is a different kind of indulgence. Because sometimes it's just easier to just sink into that negative emotion than to actually just move on. Not just that. The joke of it is that if you had a friend who was worried like that, you would be able to calm them down. Don't worry, it's going to be fine, everything's going to be great. Well, but you can't tell it to yourself. Why not? You're too stuck in your own head. We've said it before. We're very good at giving advice to other people in a very not facetious way. We have excellent life advice for other people, seriously. But try giving that advice to your own self and forget it. You're not going to listen to your own self. You got your best friend can tell it to you 100 times. Also, some random guru says that you're like, oh, did you hear? How many times have I told it to you? But your mind's blocked. You're not listening. That's why getting out of your head is so important. But now you can see also why you're so stuck in your own head. I can't take anything in. The entire spiritual conception process cannot happen because you're too full of your own concerns. And by the way, it can even be spiritual concerns that you're worried about. Where am I in my divine service? Even that. Because remember, the first step of divine service is servant puts his own self aside. Everything that you're worried about, gone. We are not dealing with that right now. We don't worry about that right now. You got to get stuff done. Even if they're very good thoughts, if they are blocking you from what are the steps in the process right now, all of it gone. It is not letting you move forward in your divine service. We've already said the answer to it. Servant has to put everything aside. Leave it all at the door. You got to get a job done. We can see how this is in our control. The other kind of akara is somebody who could, in a physical sense, they have all the organs necessary, but for whatever reason, there's no conception. For just to be honest, ultimately, there's three partners in creation. There's the Father, the Mother, and God. So without the God factor there, conception doesn't happen. Because look at it the other way. Medically, there's no reason why a person should not conceive if everything's in place. You have the God spark there, then it's not going to happen. So here it's the same kind of thing. Without making sure that we're doing Torah mitzvahs, we're leaving out the third partner in creation. So there also, we will not have the intellectual excitement leading to the birth of children as in love and fear of God. Sowing light for the righteous, etc. We have to make sure that happens. Seeing those two types of akara is going to bring us now to what we call the Mishakelia. Mishakelia is somebody who can go through the conception process. Parents give birth to children, as in intellect gives birth to a motive state. You feel love and fear of God in your heart, etc., but then they don't endure. So there's different reasons for why it's not enduring. Also, we're doing everything correctly, and we're doing everything we should, and we're seeing the whole process play out. One of the biggest things that we have to be wary of after that is self-satisfaction, or contentment. But we can never have contentment to say, I've got this all figured out, because then what happens when you have self-satisfaction, when you have contentment, you become a full vessel again. As in, you become full up with your own concerns. This is even in a good way, even in a spiritual way, to be full of your own concerns. Man, when he's a full vessel, he can't take it. That could lead somebody back into the akara stage. All of this is basically a reminder and a warning and encouragement that we have to maintain vigilance in our divine service. And how do you do that? We have to go back to the first step. What is the first step of divine service? The servant to the master, you put everything else aside. None of these concerns are going to affect us as we do what we're supposed to be doing. I think we've mentioned this Maamar is a very action-oriented Maamar. Get stuff done. Everything else, worry about another time, which is like not in this lifetime. We put in this world, we got to refine man and creation. We don't got time to pontificate about stuff. Because if we get caught up in that, we could get stuck in any of those other stages, and that's not going to let us have complete divine service. That's what we said also. It says that there should not be in your land, ba'artzecha, in your land. And we saw the word eretz, that we translate as land, is connected to the word of ratzon, will and desire, because it ran to do the will of its maker. Do not get your own will and desire to be filled, so you can't do what God wants. Okay. Then we went to the rest of the verse. That was Es misbar yimachem ale. I will fill the number of your days. How are we going to prevent self-satisfaction? How are we going to prevent contentment to say I'm doing enough? Remember, which goes back to the chapter 15 of Tanya, saying I met my 100%. I don't have to go more than that. No, that's why we always have to do 101. Because each time you feel like, okay, I reached my 100%. No, now you got to do one. You got to step out of that box and go further. And that's worth everything. Each time you change yourself, you do more. So how do we prevent that? Is that we're supposed to think that man has a fixed amount of time. I'll fill the number of your days. You only have a certain amount of time in this world. We cannot waste that time. We cannot be frivolous with that time, because that time is exact, and it's exact to do whatever you got to do in this world. And the more a person will think more about that, I only got a certain amount of time to get my life mission done, the less chance they have of just resting on the laurels and saying, okay, it's fine, I'll take care of it another time. We should be so busy with doing what we're supposed to be doing that we don't even have time to be contemplating all the other stuff. That brings us to where we are now. This is from the Zohar. See now, man's days were created and are located in the supernal graves, but when they draw to the end of their term, when they reach the scriptural limit of 70, whatever the amount is, there remains then no grade any more for them to abide in, and so their pride is but travail and vanity, and there is naught. This is from Tillim. etc. Basically, we're looking at this part of the Zohar that's telling us that we have a fixed amount of time. This is from Brachot. This is from the Gemara. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai fell ill, his students entered to visit him. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a very great sage. He lived to 120. He was the one when there was the siege of Jerusalem. Vespasian, when there was the siege of Jerusalem, he got himself snuck out. They weren't letting anybody in or out, the zealots. So he got himself snuck out. And then the thing with Vespasian, he asked for three things. It was basically before the destruction of the second base of Mikdash. There was a doctor for a rabbi that he asked for. He asked him, don't wipe out King David's family, the Davidic lineage, don't wipe them out. And the third one is Tenli Yavna Chachameh, give me Yavna and her wise men. As in, he's preserved the center of Judaism. So there's a thing, he should have asked for Jerusalem, whether or not he could have asked for that. But the bottom line is, he kind of chose that when we will always have Torah, then we will always be a people. That it's not just about the city and the location, it's about that we always have Torah, so he preserved the Torah center. He was a very, very great saint. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai fell ill, his students entered to visit him. He's essentially on his deathbed. When he saw them, he began to cry. His students said to him, Lamp of Israel, the right pillar, the mighty hammer, the man whose life's work is the foundation of the future of the Jewish people. For what reason are you crying? With a life as complete as yours, what is upsetting you? Remember, 120 years he lived. That's a full life. Crying, what are you upset about? He said to them, I cry in fear of heavenly judgment. What? As the judgment of a heavenly court is unlike the judgment of man. If they were leading me before a flesh and blood king, whose life is temporal, who is here today and dead in the grave tomorrow, if he is angry with me, his anger is not eternal, and consequently his punishment is not eternal. So the king's mad at me, okay? Here today, gone tomorrow. If he incarcerates me, his incarceration is not an eternal incarceration, as I might maintain my hope that I would ultimately be freed. If he kills me, his killing is not for eternity, as there is life after death, that he might decree. He's saying a king could put put somebody to death, but then that person, in a spiritual sense, lives on. Moreover, I am able to appease him with words and even bribe him with money. And even so, I would cry when standing before royal judgment. That's scary enough, even knowing that there's ways around it. Now that they are leading me before the supreme King of Kings, now that I'm about to go before God, the Holy One blessed be He, who lives and endures forever and all time, if He is angry with me, His anger is eternal. If He incarcerates me, His incarceration is an eternal incarceration. And if He kills me, His killing is for eternity. I'm unable to appease Him with words and bribe Him with money. Moreover, but I have two paths before me, one of the Garden of Eden and one of Gehenna. And I do not know in which they are leading me, and will I not cry? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, after 120 years at the end of his life, is saying, I don't know which path I'm going to go on. Obviously, we have questions about this. What do you mean you don't know? If you're going to Gehenna, if you're going up to eternal reward, what do you mean you don't know? Hold that thought. Now let's tell you some things about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, just to further bring the question in. The Gemara asks, and what is the reason that Rav Papa did not state his opinion in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Menachem Bar Yitzchak? So obviously we're middle of a discussion here. This is from the Gemara of Rosh Hashanah. Rav Papa could have said to you, if it enters your mind to say that this ordinance from Kippur was instituted by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the days of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, was there in fact a strip of crimson wool? You remember our wool on our goods? They would tie a rope and it would change from red to white if the Jews were forgiven. Isn't it Tana Braita? All the years of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's life were 120 years. 40 years he was involved in business that he could achieve financial independence and study Torah. 40 years he studied Torah and 40 years he taught Torah. So he lived 120 years and it seemed like he was pretty much on the right path for all of them. He only did business so that he could end up learning Torah and thereby to end up teaching Torah. And he's wondering about which path he's going to go on. Even more about this is from the Gemara of Sukkah. Apropos the character traits of Rabbi Eliezer, the Gemara cites character traits of his teachers. They're extolling the virtues of Rabbi Eliezer. So if you want to know how great he is, look at how great his teacher was. The sages said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the teacher of Rabbi Eliezer, in all his days he never engaged in idle conversation, and he never walked 4 cubits without engaging in Torah study and without donning tefillin. And no person ever preceded him into the study hall, and he never slept in the study hall, neither substantial sleep nor a brief nap. And he never contemplated matters of Torah and alloys filthy with human excrement, as doing so was a display of contempt for the Torah, and he never left anyone in the study hall and exited. As in, first in, last out. And no person ever found him sitting and silent, i.e. inactive. Rather, he was always sitting and studying, and only he opened the door for his students, disregarding his own eminent standing. And he never said anything that did not hear from his teacher. And he never said to his students that the time has arrived to rise and leave the study hall, except on Pesach Eve, Erev Pesach, when they're obligated to sacrifice the Pesach lamb. And Yom Kippur Eve, when there is a mitzvah to eat and drink abundantly. And Rabbi Eliezer, his student, accustomed himself to model his conduct after his example. So Rabbi Eliezer, he's such a great man, you should know he got it from his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who we just said, had no idea which way he was going to go when he passed away. The sages taught Hillel the elder had 80 students. 30 of them were sufficiently worthy that the divine presence should rest upon them as it did upon Moshe Rabbeinu. And 30 of them were sufficiently worthy that the sun should stand still for them as it did for Yeshua ben Nun. Joshua made the sun stand still. There was a battle that was going on. He had to get this done before nightfall. So he literally froze the sun in its place. And 20 were on an intermediate level between the other two. 80 students, 30 of them should have the divine presence like Moshe Rabbeinu. We're talking about a level here. 30 of them that could get the sun to stand still, level here, and the rest of them are somewhere in between. Do you understand what we're talking about? The greatest of all the students was Yonatan ben Oziel, and the youngest of them was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So this is the august company, the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that he hung out in. The sages said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that he did not neglect Torah, Mishnah, Gemara, Halacha, and Agadot, minutia of the Torah, and minutia of the scribes. The hermeneutical principles of the Torah with regard to our fortiori, I don't even know how to say that, Kal v'chomer, inferences and verbal analogies, the calculation of the calendrical seasons, and gematria. Basically, every single aspect of Torah is meticulous. In addition, he did not neglect esoteric matters, including the conversation of ministering angels, the conversation of demons, and the conversation of palm trees, parables of launderers, which are folktales that can be used to explain the Torah, parables of foxes, and more generally, a great matter and a small matter. A great matter is referring to the secrets of the design of the divine chariot. Remember we learned about the divine chariot. From Micha Mocha, the conduct of the transcendent universe. A small matter is, for example, halachot, that were ultimately formulated in the framework of the disputes of Abaya and Rava. He did not neglect any of these disciplines, so as to fulfill that which is stated, that I may cause those that love me to inherit substance, and that I may fill their treasuries. That's from Mishlei Proverbs. As Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was filled with the disciplines of Torah and wisdom. He was the youngest of the students, remember, of the 80. And if the youngest of them was so prolific, the greatest of them was all the more so prolific. The Gemara relates that the sages said of Yonatan ben Oziel, the greatest of Hillel's students, that when he sat and was engaged in Torah study, the sanctity that he generated was so intense that any bird that flew over him was immediately incinerated. Can you try to comprehend the level of sage that we were speaking about here? And remember, these two things that we just saw from the Gemara goes back to that first Gemara that we saw, that when he was about to pass away, he was crying because he said, I don't know which way I'm going to go. And this was not false modesty. He was really crying. After 120 years, he didn't know, which way am I going to go? How could Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai be uncertain which path he would be led? That is the question. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was so focused and committed, the words of the Maamar is pressed, pressured, and overwhelmed to fulfilling his mission every day, hour, moment. He was unaware of the state of his intellectual and emotional powers, and certainly the refinement of his inner soul powers. To say that he was so focused on doing what had to be done that he never took a moment to think to himself, what have I done? How far am I? Where am I at? What level have I reached? He never sat to consider what his own progress was. All he knew was we have to keep going. So we have so focused on the forward progress of stuff. We must get stuff done. There's so much that we have to get fulfilled that he never sat to just contemplate his own state of being. Now, obviously, we're talking about an ideal level to reach in this level of divine service. You have so wholly put yourself aside to fulfill God's will. Rabbi Yochanan, the end of his life is the first time that he actually, that's it. He can't go anywhere, do anything anymore. And he thought to himself for a second, wait a second. It's certainly understood from here that there's no place for feeling satisfaction. We can never be self-satisfied to say, okay, I've done enough. Really? Stand up to you, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, then we'll talk about whether or not you've done enough. For a person knows that every moment must be dedicated to fulfilling his mission, and if one moment passes without, he not only missed an opportunity to advance and flourish in his service, but has also rebelled against Hashem, King of all kings, and not fulfilling the task he was given. I put you on earth with one job. I gave you one job to do. What are you doing? This Maamar is go do a mitzvah, go get something done. Refining man and creation. Again, that also goes back to the idea of all the stuff that we're supposed to be doing, or making sure that everything is being done in a holy fashion. We see Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was a businessman, but he earned the money so that he could study Torah, etc. When we recognize that business jobs, the work is not an end unto itself, but it's a pathway towards something, that we've reconfigured everything. We have to live in the real world, but you have to know what the point of living in the real world is. Thinking on this, not only won't a person have satisfaction, but when someone asks what is happening ba'artzecha, as in with your will, your aspirations, what's your spiritual status? He'll bitterly cry out, what do I care about will? What do I care about pleasure? What do I care about love? What do I care about fear? You're asking me about details? I have no idea. Who cares about this kind of stuff? Love and fear is even turned into secondary stuff. Who has time to contemplate what level of love I am feeling for God right now? We have to do stuff. Don't worry, we have other Maamars that focus on love and fear of God. Right now, this is an action-oriented Maamar. How can someone think about spiritual levels and aspirations when at every moment it must be on guard to ensure that at one moment will pass in rebellion against the king by failing in that moment's mission, God forbid? When someone feels pressed at every moment to fulfill his mission, that he has no time to worry over personal aspirations, let alone satisfaction over his divine service. At this point of the Maamar, that's when the Rebbe put his head down and cried. And he cried so much, there's even some of the language that came afterwards that were not even fully, they didn't get all the words afterward. The Rebbe was so overcome with emotion to say, a person should be so focused on the fact that you have such a limited amount of time to do what you got to do in this world, that if someone would say, where are you in your spiritual standing? You'd, what? What kind of question is that? Who has time to worry about this kind of stuff? We got a job to do. We have such a tiny amount of time to do it. Think about the last minutes before something big is happening. We have no time. We must get this done. Imagine someone living their whole life in that kind of framework. I don't even have time to be contemplating my own spiritual state, which is a holy thing to do. I don't have time to contemplate my own spiritual state because God gave me such a relatively small amount of time to get my job done in this world. I don't have time to be pontificating about anything else, to be contemplating anything else. It also goes to when you're doing stuff that doesn't have a purpose, why are you doing it? Which, once you go down that road, good luck. Because once you're awake to that, why am I doing this? It doesn't mean, oh, I'm sitting around with my family right now and having a nice time. Obviously, we're not talking about there's purpose in that. But when you're doing stuff that literally has no purpose, why am I doing this right now? You can never play Candy Crush again. What am I doing right now? You have such a limited lifespan and you're spending it with this. So you can imagine why the Rebbe would get so overwhelmed and cry at this moment, because it is an overwhelming thought. But it also goes back to the idea that everything, even daily living, eating, drinking, going to work, which we have to do, all of it is supposed to be godly oriented. There's a correct way of doing all this kind of stuff. That's why we have kosher food. That's why we're going to say a bracha. That's why we're going to make sure that we work and we're going to give tzedakah from it, because that's going to elevate all of our earnings, etc. It's a total reworking of our framework of just seeing life. It's not just, oh, we're going to live a good life and also maybe do Torah mitzvahs. No, there is only one life to be living. And each time when we do that, when we reorient it, everything that we're doing in life, that we know this is Torah mitzvahs oriented, my job, it's an honest job, it's a good job, everything can be done legally, etc., etc., and then I'm going to give tzedakah from that. That is my entire approach to work. Not, oh my God, we all got to be workaholics because we want to buy stuff and then be happy in the stuff that we buy. No, that's not what we're doing here. You got to work because that's the way of the world, but where are you going with it? What are you doing with it? What is the purpose of all of it? Even if not everything that I weld right now, I understand why I'm welding this right now, but I know ultimately I've taken my whole job and I've elevated all the work I put into it because I'm using it honestly and spiritually and all that kind of stuff. I'm doing correct with it. The people I interact with, I'm showing a good example of how a Jew thinks and how a Jew functions in the world. That's what our whole mind frame is about. And if we have that mind frame, then we can't get stuck in that Mishakelia stage, God forbid. We can't get stuck there because we're never going to allow ourselves to be satisfied with however far we've gotten. Maybe I haven't done a lot, but I know that there's still so much to do, and I know because I've got so much life ahead of me. Amen. We should have so much life ahead of us. We should live it correctly. We should do good with it. Amen.